Kanye West just did the unthinkable. He went online and launched a brutal attack on Jay-Z and Beyoncé's children, and the internet instantly exploded. But this time, it didn't end with just backlash. Because behind the scenes, things are getting serious. Kim Kardashian is now reportedly taking legal steps to stop Kanye's online behavior before it escalates even further. And while the world is focused on the chaos of Kanye's posts, a completely different conversation has started brewing online. People are questioning everything from Kanye's intentions to the industry silence to why this situation is hitting a completely different level of sensitivity than anything we've seen before. Now add Beyoncé and Jay-Z into the mix, two of the most private, controlled, and powerful figures in the entertainment industry, and suddenly, this isn't just celebrity drama anymore. This feels like a full-blown culture war unfolding in real time. And the biggest question everyone is asking right now is this: how did things get this far, and who's actually going to step in and stop it? Because once legal pressure, public outrage, and industry silence all collide, there's no easy way out. And what happens next might not just change Kanye's situation. It could change how the entire industry handles celebrity boundaries forever. And what happens next might not just change Kanye's situation. It could change how the entire industry handles celebrity boundaries forever. Because once those posts went live, there was no going back. Within minutes, screenshots were everywhere. Clips were circulating. Comment sections were on fire. And what started as another Kanye West online rant quickly escalated into something far more serious, something that even longtime observers of celebrity culture said crossed a line. This wasn't just controversy anymore. This was becoming a legal and reputational crisis in real time. Now, Kanye West has always been known for unpredictability. From award show interruptions to public feuds and explosive interviews, his name has lived at the center of cultural debate for years. But this moment hit differently. Because this time, the targets weren't industry executives or fellow artists. This time, it involved children. And in Hollywood, there's one rule that still holds weight even in chaos: you don't bring kids into the crossfire. That's where things started shifting from online drama to serious consequences. Almost immediately, fans and commentators began calling it one of the most extreme outbursts of Kanye's recent public behavior. Even people who usually defended him started stepping back, questioning whether this had gone too far. And while social media was reacting in real time, the industry side of the story was already moving behind the scenes. Because when names like Jay-Z and Beyoncé are involved, things don't stay on timelines for long. They move into private conversations, legal teams, and controlled damage response. Reports began circulating that their camp was monitoring the situation closely, assessing next steps, and evaluating how to respond without escalating the situation further publicly. And that silence? It spoke louder than any tweet. Because when two of the most powerful figures in music choose not to engage immediately, it usually means the response is being calculated, not emotional. Meanwhile, another major figure was pulled into the storm: Kim Kardashian. Now Kim is no stranger to Kanye's public behavior. Their history is long, complicated, and constantly under media scrutiny. But this time, sources close to the situation suggest she's no longer willing to let things play out organically. Instead, she's reportedly taking a more structured approach, involving legal channels and internal discussions about how to protect both herself and their children from being dragged into escalating public disputes. And that right there changes everything. Because once lawyers enter the picture, this is no longer just celebrity drama. This becomes controlled, documented, and enforceable. At this point, the situation had three layers unfolding at once. First, Kanye's online behavior continuing to generate backlash. Second, Jay-Z and Beyoncé's camp staying silent but observant. Third, Kim Kardashian shifting toward legal protection strategies. And none of these layers were slowing down the conversation. If anything, they were intensifying it. Media outlets started framing the situation as a breaking point in how far public figures can go on social platforms. Commentators debated whether this was a free speech issue or a responsibility issue. Fans were divided, some defending Kanye's right to speak freely, others saying a line had clearly been crossed. But underneath all of that noise, there was a deeper conversation forming. A conversation about boundaries, about accountability, and about how quickly digital platforms can turn private conflicts into global events. Because in today's world, a single post can reach millions in seconds. And once that happens, context becomes irrelevant, only impact remains. That's exactly what made this situation so explosive. There was no slow buildup, no controlled rollout, no internal resolution before public exposure. It was instant, global, and uncontrollable. And that's what made it so dangerous for everyone involved. As hours passed, the story continued evolving. Clips were being reposted, reactions were multiplying, and public pressure was building on all sides. Some industry voices called for accountability. Others called for restraint. A few urged everyone to step back before things escalated further. But the reality was simple. The internet doesn't slow down just because the situation gets serious. And in cases like this, silence from one side often fuels more speculation than statements ever could. That's why this moment started feeling bigger than just one artist's online behavior. It became a case study in modern fame, where personal frustration, public platforms, and global attention collide without warning. And at the center of it all stood Kanye West, a figure who has spent his entire career existing at the intersection of genius, controversy, and unpredictability. But even by his standards, this moment forced a new level of scrutiny. Because now, it wasn't just about music or opinions. It was about consequences. Real ones. Legal ones. And reputational ones that don't disappear with a tweet deletion. As the situation continued unfolding, one thing became increasingly clear. This wasn't going to fade overnight. It was going to escalate, evolve, and force responses from every side involved. And whether those responses come publicly or behind closed doors, the impact of this moment is already locked into the narrative. Because in today's industry, nothing spreads faster than controversy, and nothing is harder to contain once it breaks into the open. And that's where things stopped being just another celebrity controversy. Because once the backlash fully hit, the situation didn't slow down, it intensified. Kanye West didn't immediately retreat. Instead, the online presence, the reactions, and the counter-reactions created a feedback loop that kept the story alive across every platform. Screenshots kept circulating. Commentary videos started dropping. And every major entertainment outlet began treating this like a developing situation rather than a passing headline. At this point, the narrative had fully escaped control. Because in today's digital landscape, once a story hits a certain emotional intensity, it doesn't need new information to survive, it just needs attention. And this story had plenty of it. Meanwhile, inside the industry, something very different was happening. Silence. Not confusion. Not chaos. Silence. Because when high-profile families and global icons are involved, the first response is rarely public. It is strategic. It is legal. It is calculated. Sources close to the situation indicated that internal discussions were happening across multiple camps, especially around how to prevent further escalation while protecting everyone involved from additional public exposure. And that's where Kim Kardashian's position becomes critical in this entire situation. Kim isn't just a former partner in this story. She's also a mother navigating co-parenting in one of the most publicly exposed relationships in modern celebrity culture. And when public behavior begins to affect not just reputation, but emotional stability and long-term family dynamics, the response shifts from personal to protective. That's why reports of legal preparation began circulating, not as a reactionary move, but as a boundary-setting mechanism. Because at a certain point, managing public behavior stops being about reputation and becomes about control of exposure. While that was unfolding privately, the public conversation was moving in a completely different direction. Debates started, forming across social media. Where is the line between free expression and harmful speech? How far is too far when you have a massive platform? And should platforms themselves intervene earlier in situations like this? Some defended Kanye's right to express himself without restriction, arguing that censorship only fuels more chaos. Others argued that influence comes with responsibility and that public figures cannot operate without consequence when their words affect millions instantly. But the most intense part of the conversation wasn't even about Kanye anymore. It was about what this moment represented. Because people started realizing something uncomfortable. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern in modern celebrity culture where personal conflict, mental health struggles, media pressure, and social media amplification collide all at once, with no delay, no filter, and no buffer. And when those elements mix, the outcome is almost always explosive. In the background of all this, Jay-Z and Beyoncé remained notably absent from direct public engagement. No interviews, no statements, no social media response. And that silence became its own form of communication. Because in high-level celebrity conflicts, silence is rarely absence. It is strategy. It is control. And it is often the most powerful response available. The public, however, filled that silence with interpretation. Every lack of statement became a topic of discussion. Every delay became a theory. And every media appearance unrelated to the situation was analyzed for hidden meaning. That's the reality of modern fame. Even silence is not neutral anymore. It becomes content. As for Kanye, the situation began evolving into something larger than just one moment of controversy. It became a reflection point for the entire entertainment ecosystem. How platforms handle viral escalation. How media cycles sustain outrage. How audiences consume conflict as entertainment. And how quickly a personal dispute can transform into global discussion. Because what started as a series of posts had now turned into something far bigger, a cultural case study in digital consequence. And that's where the industry started reacting differently. Not just with commentary, but with caution. Managers, publicists, and executives across entertainment began quietly reassessing how similar situations should be handled moving forward. Because if one moment can escalate this fast, then every public figure is potentially one post away from a global crisis. And that changes everything about modern celebrity management. Meanwhile, Kim Kardashian's position continued to evolve from reactive to structured. The focus wasn't just on public perception anymore, it was about long-term stability. Protecting children from exposure to ongoing conflict. Creating boundaries that reduce future escalation. And ensuring that public communication doesn't spiral into repeated cycles of controversy. That shift marks a major turning point in how celebrity families now operate in the digital age. Because it's no longer just about dealing with headlines, it's about preventing them from becoming permanent cycles. As the days continued, the intensity of the online conversation began to fluctuate, but it never fully disappeared. Clips were still being shared. Opinions were still being formed. And commentary channels continued dissecting every layer of the situation. But underneath all of that noise, one truth remained consistent. This moment changed something. Not just for Kanye. Not just for the families involved. But for the entire structure of how public figures exist in the age of instant digital reaction. Because now, every post carries weight. Every statement carries reach. And every controversy has the potential to escalate globally within minutes. And once that reality sets in, there is no returning to how things used to be. So as this situation continues to settle into history, one question remains hanging over everything. Was this just another celebrity controversy that will fade over time? Or was this the moment that permanently changed the rules of public behavior in entertainment? Because based on everything that unfolded, the industry may never be the same again. And that's where everything starts to settle, not because the situation disappears, but because it reaches the point where everyone is forced to respond differently. At this stage, the chaos online begins to slow down slightly, not because attention fades, but because consequences start taking over. When situations like this escalate to a certain level, the internet stops being the only battleground. It moves into a different space, private conversations, legal frameworks, and controlled responses behind the scenes. And that's exactly what starts happening here. Kanye West's online behavior, which initially sparked outrage and debate, now becomes part of a much larger conversation about accountability. Because once public statements reach a certain level of intensity and impact, they are no longer just opinions, they become actions with potential consequences. And that shift changes everything. Now, instead of reacting emotionally, the involved parties begin responding structurally. Legal advisors get involved more deeply. Communication becomes more filtered. And public exposure is minimized as much as possible to prevent further escalation. Kim Kardashian's position in all of this becomes even more central at this stage, not as a public figure reacting to controversy, but as a parent focused on protection and stability. Because when public conflict starts affecting private family dynamics, the priority is no longer image, it is control, boundaries, and prevention of further harm. That's why the legal angle becomes so important here. It represents a shift from reaction to structure, from chaos to containment. Meanwhile, the public conversation also begins to evolve. What started as shock quickly turns into analysis. People begin asking deeper questions. Where does responsibility begin and end for public figures? How much influence is too much influence when you have global reach? And what should platforms do when viral behavior crosses ethical boundaries? These questions don't have simple answers, and that's what keeps the conversation alive even after the initial outrage fades. Because this isn't just about one incident anymore. It's about a system that allows instant global amplification without built-in delay or reflection. And in that system, moments like this are almost inevitable. As time passes, media coverage begins to shift tone. Instead of pure shock, the narrative becomes reflective. Analysts, commentators, and industry voices start treating this situation as part of a broader pattern, one that reflects the pressure, instability, and emotional intensity that often comes with extreme fame. Because behind every viral moment, there is usually something deeper happening: stress, conflict, unresolved tension, or personal struggle that gets magnified when it enters the public space. And once it becomes public, it no longer belongs to the individuals involved. It belongs to the audience. That's the reality of modern celebrity culture. By the time the conversation stabilizes, the focus is no longer on individual posts or reactions. It shifts to impact. What changed because of this moment? What boundaries are now being reconsidered? And what future situations might be handled differently because of what happened here? Because in entertainment history, the biggest moments are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they are the ones that quietly redefine how everyone behaves afterward. And this situation becomes one of those moments. Not because it ends in a dramatic conclusion, but because it forces everyone involved, directly or indirectly, to rethink how public expression, responsibility, and protection coexist in a digital world that never slows down. For Kanye, it becomes another chapter in a long career defined by controversy, creativity, and unpredictability, but also a reminder of how quickly expression can escalate into consequence when amplified globally. For Kim Kardashian, it reinforces a shift toward structure, boundaries, and legal protection as tools for managing life in the public eye while prioritizing family stability. And for the industry as a whole, it becomes another example of how fragile the line has become between personal expression and public fallout. Because in today's world, there is no separation anymore. Everything is connected, everything is instant, and everything has impact. So when the noise finally begins to fade, what remains is not just the memory of what happened, but the awareness of how fast it happened. And that awareness changes behavior moving forward. Because once you've seen how quickly a situation can escalate in the digital age, you never look at silence, statements, or social media the same way again. And that is where this story ultimately ends. Not with resolution, but with realization. And that's where things really leave us. Because no matter which side you're on in this situation, one thing is crystal clear. This isn't just another celebrity controversy you scroll past and forget tomorrow. This is a moment that reflects how fast things can spiral when fame, emotion, and the internet collide at full speed. We just watched how a single online situation turned into a global debate, how silence became just as loud as statements, and how every move from every side instantly became public property. And now the real question is, where does it go from here? Do situations like this ever fully settle, or do they just fade into the background until the next eruption? Because if there's one thing this entire story proves, it's that nothing in the digital age stays contained anymore. Everything spreads, everything escalates, and everything leaves a trace. So I want to hear from you. Do you think this situation should have been handled privately from the start? Or is public accountability just the reality of living in the spotlight at this level? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those conversations where every perspective adds something different to the picture. And if you made it this far into the breakdown, you already know this is the type of deep dive content we cover on this channel: real stories, real breakdowns, and real analysis behind the headlines you see everywhere else. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next update on situations like this can change everything overnight.